talk to us about using business architecture to disrupt business culture. She's an enterprise architect at the Department of Defense. And the one slightly funny story I'll have here is I actually almost had the opportunity to see a previous version of this presentation. I was facilitating a room, she was in my room, I was going to see it, it would be great. At the last second, they changed the room. So I have not actually seen this, so hopefully you're excited as I am, and we'll welcome Kathleen.
All right, thank you, Alex. So as Alex mentioned, I've actually given this talk twice before. Once was at the IIBA Building Capability Conference in November, and again at the Twin City Business Architecture Summit in December. And each of those events I really enjoyed because of the learning that we all get to experience while coming here. Now I'm really passionate about this talk I'm going to be going over today, and I know that you're going to like it too, because it is something different than what you have been and probably will be seeing. Now while business architecture is at the heart of this talk, there's something much greater that I became fascinated with throughout this process, and that's the Army's culture and how to actually begin to disrupt it. Now, the intellectual freedom and creativity that I have actually achieved during this process has been pretty astounding in the U.S. Army, a strict, slow-to-change environment. But I feel fortunate that I work for a research facility that strives to have a culture that is innovative, talented, committed, and has a legacy. And that legacy is filled with innovation and change. I work for the U.S. Army ARDEC, or Armaments Research Development and Engineering Center, headquartered at Pinkerton Arsenal in northern New Jersey. And you might be wondering, well, what does ARDEC do? Well, we're responsible for two things. On one side of the house, we do all the additive manufacturing and propellant design. On the other side, we do all the software development for all our weapon systems. So anything that has to move or fire. So basically, we're responsible for everything that goes boom. Now, I've been trying to achieve my goal of introducing and building the business architecture capability into my organization, and I'm extremely proud, as I said, of introducing this war game. And I'm going to tell you that when I first started using this, I had a problem that many of you had as well. How do we actually start to build something into the organization, right? Do we need the practice first to show the value? Or do we start generating value to get that practice? When I asked other people for advice at conferences or meetups such as this, they told me, just start somewhere. Start to actually build that value, and it'll catch on. They also told me to do whatever I had to in order to start building some of these artifacts. So like other people you heard today, I spent a lot of my own time outside of my normal hours building these things. And so, I built the first capability map. I also pulled from things that already exist in our organization, such as our process framework, to build some of my own artifacts. And because I'm a systems engineer, these look a lot like systems engineering diagrams. But that's a talk I can do on another day on our work in model-based systems engineering and business architecture. The goal here, however, wasn't to shove this thing called business architecture down everybody's throats. Instead, it was about changing thought processes. I wanted to actually have people not only hear or see the value of business architecture, I wanted them to feel it. And so, this idea of doing an organizational war game was born. I wanted to destroy the static equilibrium that often goes into doing strategic planning. I wanted chaos and data and interaction, and not just interaction, but a reaction to a very real scenario. And so, I came up with this revolutionary idea of creating an organizational war game using business architecture. And this is a real picture of me in Denmark a couple years ago, Copenhagen, on an actual Viking ship. And I had no idea when I took this picture I'd be doing anything with business architecture, let alone wargaming. But I'm pretty glad the tides took me there. So, would you like to meet the architect of this war game?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so my name is Kathleen Walsh. I'm an enterprise architect at the U.S. Army ARDEC. I work in our Strategic Transformation Office in our headquarters. And I have been the champion of business architecture. I've been the one that's actually educating the workforce, building it out, and figuring out how I was going to deploy and integrate it in. Before that, I was hired into the Army to work on our future force systems. And I was working on communication software, things like Apache helicopters. A little cool, right? And then I moved on, and I was working on our IT-wide enterprise systems. I got my master's in systems engineering, where I became really fascinated with this idea of representing the organization as a system. I then certified through Carnegie Mellon. I then moved out of a process group I was in into our headquarters in our strategic transformation office. And over the past year, I've been really fascinated with gamification and neuroscience and neuroplasticity in particular, and how we need to pull from those areas to actually begin to change our cultures. Now, some of you, maybe, might be familiar with Nash's equilibrium, and this is used heavily in economics and game theory. And it's a stable state of a system in which there's several interacting participants, but no one can gain by a change of strategy as long as all others remain unchanged. And there's one example that has really come to symbolize this equilibrium, and that's the prisoner's dilemma. And in this example, you have two mobsters sweating it out in separate prison cells, each contemplating the same deal by a district attorney. If they each confess to a bloody murder, then they're going to get 10 years in jail. If one of them snitches while the other remains quiet, then the snitch will get a reward, while the other a lifetime in jail. But if they can each hold their tongue, then they'll only get a minor infraction and 1 year in jail. And what might you do in that situation? That's pretty scary if you don't actually have the ability to talk to the other person. Now, I have found that many organizations are trapped in this Nash equilibrium. They might be creating strategic initiatives, but they're not actually creating change because too many individuals are remaining static. And reasoning behind the change is not being explained nor enforced. And this results in a strategy that sounds great to managers, but falls upon deaf ears in the workforce. And we still have business goals that are elusive, and at least in my organization, our IT is still driving the strategy. And this results in an organization that is unclear of organizational purpose and unclear of organizational intent. And it further divides the business because now we have those business portions of the enterprise operating on their own and not together because cohesiveness and understanding is missing. So now, like those mobsters in that prison cell, we are all just making our best guess to everybody's strategy. So what if we could have those siloed organizations or those mobsters actually communicate? We'd probably all be better off. But this equilibrium creates a divide in the business between the strategy and the operations, causing us all to be those mobsters. And the business layer artifacts, which should be driving those decisions, IT or otherwise, are often missing. And this results in an every man for themselves mentality. And I really like this picture because plan A is to operate like an enterprise. We all want to do our best, and we all want to do what's right for the organization. But we often fall back on what we know, which is this plan B, which is to only think of ourselves and not for the good of the enterprise. So, I'm about to go rogue. I began thinking, what can I do to address this gap? Well, I thought that business architecture could actually help. So I had been going around showing people in the organization my artifacts that I showed you in the beginning, and it just wasn't catching on. And so I decided to ask them why. Because remember, I said, why should they actually buy into what I was showing them? And they said to me, well, gee, Kathleen, we really like your artifacts. We're design thinkers, we're systems engineers, we're the US Army, we love enterprise architecture. But how is what you're doing any different than what any of the other initiatives we've tried to do before? We had Enable the Enterprise, Enterprise Excellence, this red team thing. Honestly, I think your problem is a culture one. Oh, so I realized something. I had to disrupt the way they thought about it. And I had to not just disrupt the way they thought about it, I had to disrupt the way I introduce new ideas. So, what could I do? Maybe some kind of game. That would get them, huh? Yeah. Maybe a strategy game. What about something like chess? I don't know, chess is good, but it doesn't really represent what we do with the Army. What about Risk? Risk is fun, huh? Definitely more representative of what we do with the Army in war. You know what the problem, though, with Risk and chess is you only see what's right in front of you. What about those unconscious assumptions? What about those second or third order effects? There has to be something better. There must be something, maybe something I can leverage within the DoD. Let's see. We have strategy, risk, war, about my idea, and one of the individuals I told was our systems engineering director. And he said that not only was he going to allow me to shape the game around his organization, he was going to give me some resources to participate. So, with some backing from the organization, I was actually up and running. So normally this is the part of the presentation that I give some definitions in business architecture and strategy, but for the sake of time, I took them out, hoping that you guys would get the gist of it. But I did want to start with the value proposition. And I think we can all agree there is value to business architecture. And I think it's great as an analytical communication framework to actually take that strategy and turn it into action. However, when I first started using business architecture, I was pretty frustrated with it. I felt like a lot of times I was taking pretty PowerPoints and different shapes and making a nice looking PowerPoint like this slide. Thanks, guys. But honestly, I was pretty frustrated with it because I felt like it was too static. And I don't mean static in the sense that I didn't have a data repository to put everything into, or we could have dynamic views, have people in a room be able to pull different things and be able to do some great analysis. I mean, we lost something in terms of human interaction. But when I came up with this war game idea, I had a chance to make it dynamic, really dynamic. So I then threw myself for the next 6 months into learning everything I could about war games. So what did I learn? Well, there's a bunch of definitions you can read, but what a war game actually is, it's a military exercise conducted to test or improve tactical expertise. And why do a war game? Well, if you guys are listening to Professor, reading an article online, or sitting here talking to me today, you're not actually getting the same level of learning as you would with a war game. Because a war game provides a higher level of learning due to the active learning participants actually experience in the game itself. So, I've talked about a few things so far. I've talked about strategy, and I'm going to talk more about how strategic planning is becoming a thing of the past. We're actually now going to have to plan to learn. Talked about business architecture, and how that was a way to actually bridge the gap between the strategy and the operations. But for my needs, it just wasn't dynamic enough. And I talked about wargaming, and that's a way to actually immerse people into an experience. So what I've done is I've revolutionized these 3 things by integrating them. We now have an organizational war game using business architecture to drive and inform strategic decisions. So would you guys like to take a sneak peek and see what that actually looked like?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, here it is, business architecture, the war game. See if it's playing. I made it. So after actually running the game and then making this video, I was so excited, I couldn't stop talking about this thing for weeks. I do have to have a disclaimer that Dunkin' Donuts did not sponsor our war game. However, you guys know you should never do anything with strategy without some food present, right? It's just too stressful. And did you feel their frustrations? They should be frustrated. This game was really hard. I was taking things that I was throwing at them that they had never seen before. And on top of that, I was putting business architecture. But I was really proud of the individuals in this game because they were able to successfully get through it and actually do, I think, a pretty decent job with making some self-discoveries about what they were trying to do. But you guys might be wondering something at this point. Well, I'm really glad you guys asked that. So an organizational war game is built upon scenarios, and these scenarios are created by a control team. In this case, it was myself and one other individual who built them. And these scenarios are imaginative pictures of potential futures, but there's no built-in answers to the game. Instead, every single war game is created by scratch, depending on whatever new problem you're trying to solve. And therefore, they cannot become off-the-shelf products. But what a war game is really trying to do is to help people see past their own blind spots, and just like a traditional military one, it's helping to inform human decisions. Now, before moving on, I want to go back and talk a little bit about what you guys saw in that game, because, I liked it. So, you saw inside the game itself that they were all huddled around that map. And after actually coming out of this, I said I couldn't stop talking about it for weeks. Everywhere I went, I was talking about war games. Sitting next to somebody on an airplane, standing in line at the food store. It didn't matter. I was talking about it. And one day, I really struck gold with a conversation I was having with somebody. So I played a cornhole league. And for those of you who don't know what cornhole is, those are the boards with the hole, and you throw a beanbag back and forth, right? And so the opponent were making small talk, and he says to me, "So what do you do?" And I said, "I'm a business architect." And he goes, "Well, what's that? You build houses or something?" Oh. And I said, No. It's more of a strategic position. So if the organization wants to change or do anything different, they're going to consult me to make sure you have the ability to do it. And he's like, "Well, how can you be a real architect if you're not building houses?" And I said, "Well, it's like being a real architect because I have this thing called a capability map. And it's like a blueprint for my enterprise. So just like you have a blueprint of your house and you're not going to change anything in the house without consulting your blueprint because your foundation might collapse, you're not going to change anything in your business without consulting that because your business might implode." And he looks at me, he's like, "Oh, that's cool." And honestly, I guess the conversation should have died right there. However, I was able to take it one step further. And as he was leaning back to throw that bag, I said, "And we use that map to build a war game." And he missed the board. Strategy, guys. Strategy. But his ears perked up. And he said, "What do you mean by war game?" And I was like, "Well, you know in Game of Thrones, when you have everybody huddled around the map and they're trying to determine where to move their forces?" And I was going to keep going. But he interrupts me. And can you believe what this guy does as a side business? He develops expansion packs for tabletop games. And so he starts telling me really excitedly about the latest game he's working on. And in this game, the player takes on the role of treasure hunter. And they're traveling the world in search of ancient artifacts, fending off villains and danger at every turn, all in the quest for the ultimate prize, fortune and glory. And I looked at him and I was like, "Well, yeah, that's what I did for the enterprise." In my game, players take on the role of manager. And they're reviewing business capabilities using the business capability map artifact, determining what to use and or invest in, all for the ultimate prize, a signed contract. You guys, his mind was blown. Now, most important thing was I won the game. Sufficiently distracted him enough to But the second most important thing is when you play cornhole, you get free nachos. We go back to the bar, we eat our nachos, we're talking war games, because why the hell aren't you going to keep talking about those? And he's asking me, "So, where again do you work? Like, how did you get away with doing a war game?" I said, "I work for the Army." That seemed to suffice, but just between all of you guys, it wasn't that easy getting this thing going. However, I did have a lot of fun doing it. And despite all the fun and games of all this, I had something that I was actually trying to solve. I wanted to see whether or not in my organization I could use that capability map to actually make strategic decisions. So I mentioned before that the systems engineering director had actually said that he would give me resources to participate in the game, which was fantastic. However, I didn't want to limit it just to that. I wanted to pull people from all different areas and all different levels. So I went around and I just started telling people I was running a war game. I also had a war game book in my hand and waited for people to talk to me. And people did. So I had a great problem. I had 22 slots in the game, and I had hundreds of people who wanted to play. So I got to handpick them, and I picked people that were creative, open-minded, and early adapters. But it's important to note to you guys at this point that I wasn't trying to create anything useful for the organization. You might be thinking, wait a minute, Kathleen, we are business architects. We know that for you to get some kind of buy-in, you actually have to show value. And yes, I agree with you guys. However, I thought the worst thing that could have happened coming out of this game is if those few managers had said, hey, this is really great. Let's go brief the director and do this with all our strategic initiatives. Because honestly, that probably would have killed my business architecture initiative right there. Why? Well, because they don't really understand the amount of work that has to go into this at that enterprise level. It's a lot of things we have to do, right? We got to build that capability map. We have to have all those definitions, have a repository, all those value streams. It would probably collapse into the weight of itself instead of starting in those smaller segments. So what I was really trying to do with the synergy of business architecture, strategy, and war games was to plant the seed so that those people that I picked in this game would see how they could use some kind of architecture to actually go back to their projects, their teams, their divisions, their directorates, whatever, and want to have that architecture to make those decisions. And I'm going to tell you in the end how that strategy has paid off. So to get into how I actually started building the game, I began with a business model canvas, and because I'm in the Army, we translated it into a mission model canvas. And if you haven't seen this before, you should definitely look it up and start using this. But what I did is the customer segment that I started with was a non-traditional one. And the reason I picked it was because we were building an organizational war game. So I picked the staff. It was internal look. And I wanted to look under the hood and see what RDAC was providing to me and about 3,500 other people. I then took the key activities that were in that red box and derived the first capability map. This is decomposed down to the second and one case third level. Now, I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I'm a little bit of a psychic. And I can kind of see what you guys are thinking. You're thinking, hey Kathleen, isn't this just another glorified PowerPoint slide to show to management? And yes, first of all, I like it too. And second of all, no, I'm not done yet. Any good engineer, or in my case psychic, knows that the more metadata you put into a model, the more it can tell you, right? The clearer that crystal ball is going to be. So imagine if we had some kind of enablers that could give us some insight into these capabilities, right? Some kind of maturity rating table, kind of like this one, where we could quickly get the health and status. Now I do realize these are the enablers that the BizBlock hasn't been using for a while. However, when I was trained, I learned these, and honestly, to introduce it into my organization, these were a little bit softer, so I kept them. So I took this maturity rating table along with that capability map and was able to create the heat map. And this became that board for the war game, and you saw that in the video. Now, full disclosure to you guys, I didn't vet this through anybody in the organization. But that's how I was able to get it done in 6 months. Yeah. But it didn't matter, because I wasn't trying to create anything useful, right? I was trying to do all processes, so it was okay. So now the actual game design itself. In the middle, you have a control team, and that was myself and one other individual. And we were actually responsible for creating all the scenarios, actually building all the business architecture, running the game, playing all the roles of the people that weren't represented in the game itself, and then doing all the analysis. We also built a bunch of models in the game that I'm not really showing you today. And then at the top, we had 2 competing teams, Skunkworks and Tiger Team. And in a war game, you could have up to 6 different competing teams, but for simplicity's sake, we kept it to 2. And what they were really doing was picking from that capability map and rolling into a proposal to send to the market team. And the market team was a project management office. And I know a lot of you don't necessarily know how the Army is structured, but a project management office is actually completely external to our organization and external of our chain of command. So we're actually an engineering services organization, and we're competing with other Army entities, other DoD entities, and other government contractors internationally and at home to basically win the work to do for the Army. So it's a little weird, but they drove the market dynamics. So getting into the game itself. On day 1, I gave them a technical problem. And And I did this because we're an engineering organization. Everybody up through the director is an engineer. It's almost the opposite problem from you guys. But I wanted to give them something that they could wrap their heads around and not get thrown off and discouraged on the first day. So what they had to do was we gave them a value stream from the market team. And we asked them to pick which of those capabilities that they thought could be used in that value stream, and then determine what might need funding, and roll that into a proposal to give to the market team. And on day one, the teams did pretty well with this. But there were a couple assumptions that we had. One of them was teams will not document the capability allocation to the value stream steps. I mean, what do you think? You give them this assignment, and do you think they took the time to take those capabilities and actually write them down? No, they didn't. We were right, they did not do it. However, you did have at least one person on each of the teams that took some pretty good notes, which is going to be really critical on day two. So then the next assumption, teams will focus on technical capabilities instead of business capabilities. I've been in our strategy office for 5 years. I've never seen anybody talk about a business capability. Do you think it was any different in this game? People are shaking their head no. Well, guess what? We were wrong. They did talk about the business capabilities. And this is probably the top thing to come out of this game, was because we were actually able to get them to do that and roll that into their plan for how they were going to have to actually get work done. And people, when we had the after action, were talking about that, how much they actually liked it. And what I attribute that to is we had that giant capability map in front of them. They could not ignore the business capabilities. So then the next assumption, teams will distribute investments more or less evenly over the map. Well, I'm going to tell you we were wrong. However, there was a learning curve to this. So you had the capability map. We had poker chips and models and different value things that they could actually determine how they were going to make these investments. But at first, they were thinking when they wanted to raise the level of the capability, they had to not only invest in all those enablers, but they had to do them equally. So all 4 would have to be a red status or a yellow status. And then they thought, hey, if I'm using this capability and it's at a yellow, which would be a 3, I should raise it to a purple. We should be the best. We should be level 5. But then they started to realize as they read those definitions that it wasn't so bad to be a level 3. Or maybe we don't need a tool for this. We just need to adjust our process. So they had really great strategic discussions, which was another great thing at our after action that they pointed out that they really liked about the way we did this. So then day 2. So day 2, we gave them an organizational problem. And this is where things really took a turn. So again, we're an engineering organization, not great at solving the organizational things. We expect higher management to just tell us what to do, and it does not happen. So what they were supposed to do was take that capability map, determine how they were going to have to do a deployment strategy, take the capabilities they thought they needed to use for that, compare it to what they've already funded on day 1, and adjust the proposal as needed. And as I said, things really kind of went bad. So the first assumption was teams will not create a value stream for the new problem. So unlike day 1 where we gave them the value stream, we didn't give them the value stream on day 2. Instead, we just asked them to come up with a deployment strategy, hoping that they would think, hey, day 1 was pretty good with those boxes that had some steps. Maybe we should do that again. Well, I'm going to tell you we were right. They didn't do it. And this was really frustrating to watch, and I really wanted to interject, but I couldn't, because they kept saying, like, we need a process for this, we need a process, but they never wrote it. So then it has to make the second one correct, because if you didn't actually write out the value stream, you can't allocate the capabilities. So then the final one, teams will not crosswalk the allocated capabilities to consolidate investments. Well, I'm going to give them credit for it, because even though they didn't document it on day 1, they had some people that did some decent notes, and they probably did about a 75% solution, and they tried to do it. So I want to give them a little bit of credit. So those were the assumptions that I observed during those 3 days locked away in our training building. But going back after that, I really needed to come up with some kind of way to kind of get my message across to the rest of the organization. And something my organization is always frustrated with is a story that begins with Kodak. signs of complacency. They failed to see the dangers of their existence. They relied on the past for their future. They didn't have a strategy backed by purpose, and they failed to lead. Now, we in the government can also fall victims of this. A lot of times we not only think that our jobs are secure, we think the mission is secure. Nothing's going to change because change takes so long here. However, we, like any other organization, can shoot ourselves in the foot if we end up creating some senses of false urgency, right? But the way we have to counteract that complacency is with a sense of urgency. And nothing should be more urgent than the work we do with the Army because someone's life depends on it. Now, I was actually able in the game to create this sense of urgency by writing the scenario around one of our top threats in the nation. And every move that they made during this game, I knew that they were not complacent because they were aware of dangers to their existence, aware of opportunities, and every single move they made was backed by a sense of purpose. So by going into the game and actually explaining the strategy behind the decisions, giving them the business architecture, and then giving them that sense of urgency, we were able to create the environment for non-complacent decisions that we wanted to see. Now, I mentioned Nash's equilibrium before, and Nash's equilibrium assumes that everyone that's in that game knows the equilibrium strategy of the other players. Now, again, I was able to actually create this in the game with that sense of urgency. But in terms of the equilibrium, the equilibrium itself, it's kind of an important point because we all kind of mess up with this. If you're at home, you're at work, and you're making a decision, you're sitting around thinking what other people are going to do before they do it. And you're basing your own move on what they do before they make that action. And that could be wrong, right? Kodak thought that nobody was going to change and they could stay number one. We in the Army assume and know that our enemies are going to change, but the mission isn't. Now, what I did in the game, the scenario that I picked, was this thing called A2AD. And what that is that's basically Russia, China, some other countries are able to completely destroy our GPS technology, causing serious issues with situational awareness and being able to move our forces and our equipment from place to place. And this is causing problems because we want to get our soldiers home safe. So in the game itself, by really wrapping this whole thing around that scenario, everything that crossed that market team's desk, they were actually talking about what effects that was going to have on the strategy of them achieving their mission. So I said then why it's so important to do this sense of urgency, but why was it equally important to have that business architecture being fed into the game? Well, I'm going to put you in another scenario. Picture yourself in a meeting, and you're in this meeting. Everybody's arguing. And what are they arguing about? Well, they're arguing about what things mean. And if they're not arguing about that, it's clear they're just spinning in circles because nobody's on the same page of intent. By giving them that business architecture, which was our capability map, all the definitions, the maturity grading table, the value streams, we were able to get them on that same page in terms of meaning. So there was no question. And you saw that in the video, they had all those papers. That was them looking at the definitions. And nobody had any qualm about what it meant or not. They believed that as the truth, and that was kind of the beauty of a war game, because they had to believe that that was their world. So, with this sense of urgency and the business architecture, if we didn't have that, people would have gone into the game probably asking, or dare I say, whining. What is this? And what is that? And that whining, or what I like to say is a cry for help, currently comes out in the organization now. And do you know how we hear it? We hear it when people say things like, I don't know what the strategy is. I don't know where I fit in. So how come when we play a game, if we don't have the rules, we say the game's not fair? But then we go over to strategy, we drop the word game, and we don't think we need rules. But we do. We really do. And do you know what those rules are? Those are often the business rules that we have missing from the organization. So what I was able to do is think about that going into this game itself. And I brought in the business architecture. And I was also able to put on top of that the war game idea, which does this crazy thing and allows the Army to start to become more agile. Because we're very strict with how we have to do our procedures. You cannot change. They're linear, and that's the way we have to do it. But a war game transcends all that. And now you have people actively role-playing. And the best thing for me is we get away from Nash's equilibrium. sometimes thinking about some of the analytics that we do or a lot of the AI, because a lot of times we're assuming we know where things are going. But we don't, because we have these human factors and we have a lot of other factors that we have to take into account. And wargaming actually allows us to take that into consideration. So we've now entered an age of disruption where agility trumps scale and strategy takes on a new role and a new meaning. And we can no longer just plan, but we can only prepare. And this calls for what Columbia's Rita Bethel-McGrath says is a shift from learning to plan to planning to learn. Now this war game, which is discovery-based learning, is a powerful tool that can be used in any significant strategic undertaking fraught with uncertainty. And unlike traditional strategic planning, where it is assumed that much is known, this forces a discipline for learning and forces people to voice what they don't know. Thus, as a planning tool, it raises the visibility into those make-or-break uncertainties so common in new ventures, or in our case, significant threats to the nation. Now, I've been trying to show that business architecture can be used as the foundation of an organizational gaming experience, catapulting us out of traditional strategic planning into this new era of agile learning. But I cannot do this alone. I need the help from the greater business architecture community. If we don't succeed in showing that business architecture can be used as this authoritative data in strategic learning, then we're all going to continue to make unconscious assumptions and be trapped in that equilibrium. But we don't need to be the monsters. We don't need to be Tyrion in Game of Thrones, just making a guess, losing half our army and one of our dragons. Instead, we can role play as them and get rapid insight into our unknowns and our uncertainties. We can do this through the unique combination of the disciplined approach of business architecture and the active learning and organizational wargame to drive and inform human decisions. Now, I do believe that wargaming is a growing and important piece of business analytics and combined with business architecture to bridge the gap between the strategy and the operations. I think we're all going to be able to continue to disrupt these complacent cultures. Now, you might be wondering, well, that sounds great. Where do I get started? Well, you already know where to get started with business architecture. But in terms of war games, I would recommend going into Amazon. You can type in organizational business war games. You're going to get some books that come back. This one is from some guys from Booz Allen Hamilton, and I actually have them with me if anybody wants to find me, take a look. This one, though, it only goes over scenarios and use cases. It doesn't tell you how to do anything. But then I read another book 2 weeks ago, and it's called Business War Games by Benjamin Gillard. And this one actually gives you some hows. However, it is much different than the game I ran because this is more focused on just the role playing, whereas I was bringing that urgency and almost the military-like war game aspect into it, which personally I think was really important to get people to be competitive in a scenario. So you also might be wondering, well, that's great, you did that in August. What's happened since then? Well, I'll tell you. So I've actually been working on some teams at RDEC where we're possibly going for a Malcolm Baldrige Award. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's a National Quality Award for Performance Excellence, and it's given to people, public and private, inside the U.S., not people, organizations. And we won in 2007, becoming the only federal organization to have won, and we remain the only DoD organization to have won, and if we won again, we would be the only federal organization to have won twice. So we've been using that capability map that I created for the war game, and now we've started to validate it and fill in the gaps by running through this Baldrige process. And so what we're actually doing is using that map to identify opportunities for improvement, or things that maybe we should be doing in the organization. And they're OFIs for short. And what I said to you earlier about my strategy of picking creative, open-minded, early adopters, this is where it comes into play. Because there's 7 category teams, and on each of these teams, I have somebody that either is from my war game or my weekly business architecture meetings. You might say, well, what are those? Well, I've been hosting weekly business architecture meetings, and I have people that have been showing up without any funding, and they've been working and doing things. I don't require them to do it, but they have. So I have quite a bit of people in the organization that want business architecture and are now doing it on their own time, which is amazing. So just to kind of tell you what this is, it's still in the tradition of not changing, or it's about changing thought processes and not actually using hard and strict business architecture. So this looks exactly like that capability map that I showed you before with that map. And instead of having the 4 enablers, I have 7 different seven different Baldrige teams. And so they had identified all those OPs, and then the greater team said, oh, we'd really like to be able to see how they're redundant, related, and how we might have to work together. And they were coming up with, and excuse me to the Lean Six Sigma presentation before, but a lot of different crazy Lean Six Sigma house of qualities and criteria that were really overcomplicating things. And I thought, well, maybe there's something simpler I can do. So I grabbed the reps from those different teams that knew something about business architecture, and I said, hey guys, we have these opportunities. Let's come up with, again, the deployment strategy of how we have to do this. What capabilities do we need to do it? And then I put it into a map like this. And for example, capability 7.2, I can't even see it, but I think in category, or on team 1, there was one, they needed one of the capabilities, and then for team 3, they were using that capability 3 times. So all of a sudden, that gave us some insight into the importance of the capabilities and also where people had to start communicating. So I brought this to the greater Baldrige team, showed it to them. They really liked it, and now we've actually been organizing around it for our Baldrige activities. So that to me is pretty powerful. So I do want to thank you guys. If you want to keep in contact with me, my information's up there. I was passing around some of my really fun business cards, so if you didn't get one, please come and find me, because I think you'll like it. But I guess